Hey there, friends. Andrew here with mushroomspawnstore.com. And today is part 3 of the series of how to grow in an all in one mushroom grow bag. So, I shot this video previously. I wasn't super happy with how it came out. I felt like I left a little bit of information out. So, I'm reshooting and I'm using, um, I don't have any other colonized bags, and I kind of already opened the original bag, and that is fruiting right now. So I'm just going to demonstrate the steps with an uncolonized bag. Um, so let's get going. When your bag is fully colonized, it's ready to fruit. The laziest way to do it is to just once it's fully colonized, wait. And I call it the lazy man method. You don't even open the bag, and inevitably it will fruit. It takes a lot longer, um, and it's maybe not the best method, but it works. And if you have you don't have special containers, or you don't want to do any active maintenance with fresh air exchanges or maintaining humidity, this method would work. So you just take your colonized bag, set it on a shelf, and kind of forget about it. Um, Probably not the best method, but it works. I've done it many times when I got super lazy. The next method is going to be you're going to open the bag. Let me get a knife. So you're going to want to cut the top seal right at the seal. Okay. And now the bag's open. So this is going to allow you to get fresh air into the bag once a day. And then if you need to mist some water on the sides of the bag to keep the humidity up, you can do that. And then just fold it closed. You can use like a paper clip or one of them small little document clamps or something like that. And once a day, come open the bag. You can kind of squeeze out the old stale air, let some new fresh air in. It takes about 10 seconds to do. Hold it, put it back on the shelf. One thing you can do for this method of once you've got the bag, if you're going to fruit in the bag, keeping the bag roughly intact, take a needle or a pin or something like that and just poke some small holes right above the surface of the block. And this is going to allow CO2. CO2 is heavier than air, or heavier than oxygen at least, and is going to allow the CO2 to kind of drain out, I guess, of those little holes and increase or decrease the levels of CO2, which will help with fruiting. Because the whole point of introducing fresh air is to lower the CO2 concentration as much as possible. And that lowering of CO2 concentration is what is one part of the triggering mechanism for mushrooms to fruit. Think about how they are in nature. Mycelium grows underground, and it's only once it reaches the surface where there's fresh air and the correct humidity that the mushrooms fruit. So we want to maintain a high humidity, and we want to keep the CO2 levels as low as possible by introducing fresh air. And so those little pinholes are going to help if you choose to fruit in the bag like this. Now, um, you can also leave the bag sealed this way. And just naturally, because those holes are going to drain the CO2, you don't necessarily need to fan it or introduce the fresh air daily. I still would. It is just it's best practices. But it's not, if you do this little pinhole technique, um, it's somewhere in between lazy man and fanning every day. So now that we've got those two kind of very basic methods, they're probably not the best method to fruit the bags, but they don't require any additional equipment or process or anything like that. So they're super easy. My personally preferred method for fruiting these bags is to cut them off about a half an inch or an inch above the surface of the colonized block. And so I'm going to do that. And I'll show you the bag from the original two videos here in a minute and what's happening with that. So now we've got the bag cut down and we've got the surface or the top of the block exposed. You can throw a rubber band around this block and that will help prevent mushrooms from growing, down from the bottom in between the bag and the block. It won't prevent 100% of them, but it helps a bit. And so this method requires another container, and you can use the purpose-built monotubs that you can buy all over the place. We don't sell them right now, but they're available on Amazon and stuff like that. Let me see. So this is a purpose-built monotub. I think this is like the medium size. They sell one that's about half this size, and they sell one that's probably about 50% larger. And it's pre-drilled with holes. It comes with plugs that you use. If you were going to use this as like a traditional monotub, and you were going to go bulk subs or grain spawn and mix it with bulk substrate and fruit in a larger cake, which we're going to do a video on in the future. You would plug the holes and wait until the cake is colonized. And then when it's colonized, you remove the plugs and put these little filter patches on. And these filter patches allow the fresh air exchange without requiring daily, remove the lid and fan. So these are great. They're a little expensive, but they don't require you to drill any holes because they're already pre-drilled, and they're a little more compact than using like a Sterilite tote, which I'm going to get right now and show you. So the other option, the other option would be to just get, I think this is a 64 quart storage container from your local big box retailer. This is a cheaper option. These are like $50 as opposed to 35, $40 for the purpose-built monotubs. And some people will drill holes in the side of these to kind of replicate the purpose-built monotubs. And we've been drilling. I mean, mushroom growers have been drilling holes in storage containers for a few decades now. My personal recommendation is don't bother. First of all, drilling through this plastic is a real pain, and it tends to shatter if you don't do it properly. You're also destroying a good storage container for any other use. Once you've drilled the holes in it, like are you going to store your stuff in it if it's got holes? And so I wouldn't recommend it. It's completely unnecessary. What I do instead is just once a day, come by, take the lid, do this. And that's your fresh air exchange. I'm going to show we'll get some shots, what it looks like inside. We've got some of our 6-pound bags in here. So you can see we've got some pins going on, I think all of them. 2 out of 4 right now are pinning, showing some fruits. But there you go. That is that. It's really simple. Like I said, it's the cheaper option. It doesn't require that you buy the purpose-built monotub. You can get these really easily same day. Just go up to Walmart or Home Depot or something. Spill water everywhere. So what you would do is you would take your colonized block that has the the excess plastic cut off of it, and just put it in a container like that, and then monitor it. Come by like once a day. You can do your fresh air exchange, and if necessary, you can spray water on the walls of the container, which will help with maintaining humidity. If you've got a lot like that Sterilite tote I just showed you had 4 bags in it, and at this point, it doesn't require any misting. It's built up a humidity and condensation on the walls and on the lid, which help maintain the humidity inside of the container. And that's primarily because there's 4 blocks, so it's basically full. Mushrooms, like mammals, breathe in oxygen and exhale water vapor and CO2. And so naturally, they kind of build their own humidity in an enclosed container. And then we just need to come in and introduce the fresh air. Now, I want to show you guys where we're at with the original bag from the injection and the break and shake tutorial. And it's doing well. So there are a couple pins on here. I'll switch back to the other camera really quick. So you can see there's a couple mushrooms starting. It's been, I'd have to look and check. I think it's been about 3 weeks. And that's normal. I probably opened it before it was fully consolidated, which just means so the bag will be fully colonized, or at least it will look from the exterior like it's fully colonized. And this is kind of like an old industry term. I don't know that it's like technically correct, but we just called it consolidation. And it's kind of a phase where it's fully colonized, but it's not ready to fruit, even though we're introducing fresh air and keeping the humidity correct. It's kind of like a transitional phase from a vegetative state into the fruiting stage. And that can take anywhere from a week to 2 or 3 weeks. It really depends on the genetics for the most part, environment also, but primarily the genetics. So this bag is doing well. I expect that it'll be a decent first flush. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 visible mushrooms growing right now, which doesn't seem like a lot, but what tends to happen is if you get a smaller quantity of mushrooms, um, they tend to be slightly larger. And also, my experience from almost 20 years of growing mushrooms is that the first flush frequently is kind of disappointing. Like your expectations are like, I've got an example of one that actually had a really good first flush, which is this. This is one of our 6-pound bags. And obviously, these mushrooms look kind of mutant. They're a little stubby, but it's a pretty good flush, honestly, especially for a first flush. Like I wouldn't. This is not necessarily typical. It's totally normal to get a flush like this, but it's not necessarily what you would expect. And at least from my experience, like I said, I've been doing this almost 20 years now. It's pretty common for the first flush to be, not what you expect. And then what ends up happening is your first flush is slightly disappointing, and then the second flush is like, holy cow, like what happen. So, and I don't know what causes that. Honestly, I have no idea. It's just a pattern I've recognized after hundreds of grows. And then we've got one that's slightly further behind, but also looks like it's flushing pretty well. So there's lots of uh, mushrooms there starting. And so, all right. So that's the fundamentals of fruiting. And the key takeaways are that you need to have enough fresh air exchange and maintain a high enough humidity to allow the blocks to start fruiting. And whether you go with the lazy man tech where you don't even open the bag, or whether you just cut off the top of the bag, maybe punch some holes in the side of it, or if you go with a monotub, whether it's a purpose built monotub or just a sterilite container, the whole goal is to introduce fresh air, keep the humidity high, and just keep doing that until they start fruiting. And even while they're fruiting, like these mushrooms here, it's been fruiting, but even still, I come by every day and I kind of open and fan some fresh air into the container. Even though the purpose built monotub doesn't necessarily need you to do that, I still like to do it. It's maybe an old habit from growing in the sterilite containers because for a long time, and even now, I think I only have two of these little monotubs. All of my previous grows were done in either 64 quart or 110 quart sterilite containers. So I want to also demonstrate how to harvest and when to harvest. So the original bag is not ready to harvest yet, but this one is. Let me get some paper towel down, soak up water. So this bag, you can see, I'm gonna try and get a better view. Those caps are all open. I wouldn't recommend letting it go any longer than this. I was trying to put off shooting this video until the original bag was ready to harvest so I could harvest those and give you guys results from our smaller bag. But this should be good enough to demonstrate when to harvest. So you can see almost all of those caps are open and they're starting to make a mess of spores, which is why I'm shooting this video now because I'm going to show you how to harvest. And it's time to do that. So now that we've established when to harvest and how to get to harvest by fruiting your bags and the conditions and methods to use for that, um, this is kind of tough because the stems on these are really short. They got giant caps, but really short stems, which genetics, maybe the next flush will have longer stems. Kind of irrelevant to me because it's all the same. And this looks like a decent harvest. I wouldn't be able to guess weight. I'd have to go pull a scale out and do maybe I'll do that. So harvesting, you want to reduce the damage that you're going to cause to the block as much as possible. So trying to avoid when you're plucking the mushrooms here. Let's see if I can get a better view. So that is this one. Okay. So this mushroom right here, I'm just gonna try and demonstrate this. This is tough because this bag is like kind of stuff. There's no really good way for me to grab these mushrooms by the stem, but that is kind of what you want to do if possible. And I like to tilt them one direction until I feel it starting to break at the base. And then I tilt it in the other direction and give it a little twist. It should come off pretty clean. Still a little bit to clean up on there. And sometimes it's easier to wait until they're dry. Like if there's a little crud or a little bit of the substrate stuck to the base of the mushroom, sometimes it's easier to just dry them like that. And then the substrate also dries and it becomes really easy to brush off of the mushrooms. So let's go. Let's get to harvesting. Some of them will be really easy because like if you look at that fiber, right? So that's actually a piece of mycelium that started growing away from the block and was kind of suspended in midair, maybe stuck to the side of the bag. And the mushroom ended up growing off that little piece of mycelium, so that little tag end right there. So some of them will be really easy to get harvested and do it cleanly and do it without damaging the block. Some of them are more difficult than others. So let's just see. And I was kind of concerned when I saw them growing because I saw the caps getting bigger and the stem's not doing much. I was like, oh, is this going to yield? But it looks like it did pretty well. I would just off the top of my head, I would guess this. There's probably about 1.5 ounces of dried mushrooms. And that's not bad for a first flush. You're going to be able to get 3 flushes, um, maybe 4. And so be hitting 1.5 ounces on the first flush is a good sign. So our 6-pound bags should yield um, 3 to 4 ounces pretty easily. I mean, I try and be conservative. I don't want to be like, oh, yeah, you're definitely going to hit 4 ounces. I mean, you should, without any issue, be able to hit 3. Um, but depending on a lot of this is going to depend on the genetics. And since I brought it up, genetics wise, I would avoid varieties like Penis Envy or Enigma or any of these like more boutique varieties. Um, a lot of them require they grow slower. They don't produce quickly. They colonize the bags slower. They take longer to fruit. They're especially Penis Envy from my experience is very finicky about the conditions that it will fruit in. So if you're not doing your fresh air exchanges enough, or if the humidity drops too low, like it just won't fruit. And so yeah, I would advise against using those particular strains in all-in-one grow bags. Now they're great for doing traditional monotub like spawn to bulk methods. They work great in there, and obviously like with Penis Envy and Enigma, they're way more potent than traditional cubes. Um, but for like I think this is either Amazonian or Golden Teacher. I want to say it's Amazonian, but it's just weird because the stems are shorter than typical. It could just be that my liquid culture is like kind of old and the genetics are decaying, or they're not fresh. But either way, I'm not upset with how this looks. So I'm gonna keep plucking these mushrooms away, trying to keep the block intact. And the reason we're trying to not tear out big chunks of the block is to avoid exposing um, any of the interior of the block where there's a lot of grain. What can end up happening is if you tear away a big chunk of the block, it can end up being a vector for contamination. Sometimes you're going to tear into the block and it's going to expose pieces of grain, like the insides of the grain that potentially aren't fully colonized. And that may lead to contamination issues. That grain becomes a easy vector for a contaminant to land on and then begin growing. And you can use a razor blade. It's not necessary. Sometimes with like the bags, it it's harder to get a razor blade in there because you're working in 3D as opposed to just like a planar surface of a monotub where you can kind of get down and run it across the surface easy. But the problem you'll run into with that is leaving the a small portion of the mushroom behind also poses a vector for contamination. So the ideal the ideal outcome is that we're going to take all of the mushroom body off of the block and not leave any behind, because that little piece, like if you use a razor blade to cut that mushroom off, that little piece of mushroom that gets left behind on the surface of the block will inevitably contaminate and start to rot or get green trichoderma mold on it or something like that. So we kind of best practice is try and get rid of all of the body of the mushroom off of the block. And the best way to do that is harvest by hand, give them a little bend one way, bend them the other way, and then a slight twist. And most often you're not gonna tear out a big chunk of the block. You're gonna get the full body of the mushroom. You're not gonna leave anything behind. And that's going to be best practices. So see if we can't get this bag harvested. And sometimes you'll get like a big cluster and you'll have to harvest the whole cluster at once. So I think I've got one right here. I'm going to show you. Be a little bit more careful about it. Really back and forth, a little twist. And so like you'll get like a little cluster that's kind of all coming from one spot, and it's easier to just harvest the cluster as a whole as opposed to trying to pick each individual mushroom out of the cluster one at a time. Yeah, these are kind of goofy. All cap, no stem. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of like that. I mean, I know there's the old wives' tale or whatever about the caps are more potent. It's probably still a debate. I don't really follow it because it's kind of irrelevant. A mushroom's a mushroom, and just eat the whole mushroom. Who cares what part of it's more potent? But I know back in the day, everyone wanted caps. Caps, man. My bag is light on caps. And well, it looks like I got a lot of cap. The cap to stem ratio is looking really nice. This one, the way these grew, pretty wild. Really packed in there. Just chunks, dude. And I'm going to get into drying these also. So I'm going to explain a couple ways you can dry these. The best way is going to be a dehydrator. You can get them pretty cheap. So you're going to be growing, and dehydrator obviously has multiple uses. Like you can make fruit, um, like the dried fruit skin type deal, like homemade fruit roll up type of thing. Um, I highly recommend trying to dehydrate watermelon. I know it sounds wild, but dehydrated watermelon is like candy. It's so good. But you can make your own jerky and stuff like that. So it's easy to justify buying the dehydrator. You can dry them in the open in front of a fan. The only issue you're going to run into is if your ambient humidity is too high, the mushrooms are never going to get to a proper dryness for long-term storage. So you can, they'll be okay to store for short term, but if you're going to dry them just like in front of a fan with no heat assistance, then you're probably, and I mean, unless you live in the desert. I mean, if you live in like Arizona, like, and the humidity is 5% or something, you're gonna have no problem drying these to basically cracker dry. Excuse me. But for most people, you're not going to be in an environment that's going to allow you to dry them fully without the addition of heat. Wow, this is like harvesting. I don't even know. This is wild. This whole chunk. I'm really hoping I don't tear away a big piece of the block, but it's like almost a baseball sized chunk of mushrooms. Okay, good. It came off pretty clean. So like, yeah. Oh, there you go. Big old cluster. That's a fair harvest. I mean, I'm not disappointed at all. Get the last little bits. Also, um, any of the pins or mushrooms that didn't make it to maturity, like we call them aborts because they kind of aborted their growth prematurely. Like these little guys, harvest those. Even if you don't want to eat them, throw them away, or whatever, just get them off of the block because they will rot and they will be a vector for contamination going forward for your next flush. So it looks like I probably still got a little bit of cleaning up to do, but I want to get this process moving. So I'm going to put this away. So that's that. That's how to harvest. Drying. So getting back to the drying portion. You can do it in front of a fan. Worst case scenario, it's like my lowest recommendation. If you have no other options, use a fan at the very least to get them dry enough, and then you can store them in the fridge or the freezer until you want to use them or until you can dry them further. And that way they don't go bad because it's unlikely that you'll dry them enough to prevent mold from growing on them if you just dry them in front of a fan. If you have a convection oven, don't use an air fryer. Well, I guess you could. I wouldn't recommend it unless the temperature goes low enough, like 125 degrees Fahrenheit. But like your normal oven at home, if it has a convection setting, that means it has a fan in the back of it. Sometimes on the newer ovens, they call it an air fryer mode, which is just marketing. It's a convection oven. I guess air fryers are really just convection ovens with new marketing. But anyway, I digress. So your oven will have either a convection setting or like an air fryer setting. All that is there's a fan in the chamber of the oven that runs and circulates the air. You can use that type of oven if it has either of those features as a dehydrator. So set the oven temperature to about 125 degrees Fahrenheit. If you want to be on the safe side, because there is a hysteresis, so if you set it at 125, it might hit 135. It might bounce between 115 and 135. Um, so you could be a little safer and set it at 115. But I've dried them at 135. I tend to dry them around 130, 135 degrees just to get it done. And that's never been an issue. So set it to 125. Put them on like a baking sheet and stick them in there and let them go overnight. And within 12 to 18 hours, they should be basically cracker dry, meaning when you go to break them, they're like a cracker. They should be very brittle and they should break into pieces. If they're flexible at all, that means they're not dry all the way. And for long-term storage, you want them to be as dry as possible. And I would even recommend if you have a bit of mushrooms, let's see if we can get these all into shot. Uh, Actually, let's just do this. So this is the results off of our larger 6-pound bag. First flush. It's pretty good. Again, I think that's probably an ounce and a half dried, maybe 2 ounces, honestly. You know, let me go grab a scale really quick and I'll bring it back here and I'll show you guys how to figure out what your yield's going to be. All right. So I think I'm going to need, I guess I can just pile them up here. So to calculate your dry weight, mushrooms are 90% water. And that's I mean, it can go a couple percent either way, but generally speaking, um, they're 90% water. So that math makes it really easy. You would take your wet weight multiplied by zero point 0.1 for 10%, dry mass, dry uh, mass by dry weight, and that is a good estimate of what your dry total would be from the wet total. Yeah, so 400, 434 grams wet weight times zero point 0.1 is 43 grams, which is almost exactly an ounce and a half. You can tell I've been doing this for a while because that wasn't, I obviously had to weigh these, and I told you that's about an ounce and a half. That's 20 years of experience for you. Um, so yeah, that is pretty much all of the information I'm going to be able to pack in here. I can't really think of anything else. If you guys have any questions or comments, you can drop them down below. I'm pretty quick about responding. You can also reach out to me directly through our customer service email. It's customer.service@mushroomspawnstore.com. Um, with any questions you have, product questions, help question, like, product use questions, stuff like that. So I think that pretty much wraps it up. Again, here's the original bag. It's fruiting, but it was taking too long. And I wanted to get this video out because I know there's people waiting to see how to fruit the mushrooms or how to fruit your grow bags and get mushrooms like we have here. Um, so you're not, one more thing. This was from one of our 6 pound all in one bags. That is not, you're not going to get it. At least I don't think, I don't, maybe, but unlikely you're going to get an ounce and a half from a flush. Um, you should be able to yield an ounce to 2 ounces from these 2 pound bags. But yeah, so that's a good demonstration of what our 6 pound bags can do or will do. Pretty good yield. I'm going to get 2 more flushes out of that. So I expect I will hit 4 ounces once it's all said and done. Potentially more. That if that first flush was that good, and I'm thinking the second one's also going to be pretty nice, and then the third, that'll take us up to 3 or 4, and then we'll get a third flush out of it and get us right to 4, maybe slightly more. So I hope you guys found that helpful. If you're looking to buy these grow bags, you can check out our website at mushroomspawnstore.com down below. You can use discount code ShroomTube, and that'll get you 15% off your whole order. And much love, guys. It was nice. See you.